Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of the 20th and 21st of July 2024. I will be having another look also at the horoscope of JD Vance. Now, the reason being is that we now know what time he was born. He was born at 8:11 a.m. So that is kind of interesting because he has late Leo rising. There was speculation that he might have had Scorpio rising, but no, he has late Leo rising, which means he has Regulus fairly close to the ascendant. And if you know about Donald Trump's horoscope, you'll know that that means that JD Vance and Trump have their ascendants within a couple of degrees of each other. So yes, I will be looking at JD Vance's chart again, but this time I know what time he's born. Now, another thing going on, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, is that there is apparently some huge Microsoft outage. I think it's related to a company called CrowdStrike, and there was a cybersecurity update that went wrong. And I'd like to thank two commenters, Lisa Michelle and Sujata, for pointing this out to me, because I didn't really know that it was going on. And I will be looking at it, and I think we know what the reason is, and maybe it's not what you think. So we will be considering the astrological causation of this outage. But yeah, first of all, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for the weekend of the 20th and 21st of July 2024. So here's a chart set for midnight on Sunday, the middle of the weekend. And in this central part of the weekend, where Saturday turns to Sunday in New York, we have the moon at 25 Capricorn. So, for most of the weekend, the moon is going to be in Capricorn, and it makes a trine to Uranus in Capricorn. And of course, we also have a full moon. I've talked about this full moon on several occasions, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it today. But yeah, this is the weekend of a full moon. So as it is the weekend of a full moon, it may be a time of realization where we understand the way things are going and we see the truth of the matter, for better or for worse. So when we're presented with the truth, we have an opportunity to make a change or to adjust our plans. Of course, very often when we see the truth, we ignore it because the truth can often be just too much effort. So just because we see the truth doesn't mean that anything happens. I suppose it's like being in therapy, isn't it? One can spend years in therapy understanding why one is who one is, understanding the reasons for all one's problems, the reasons for one's making mistakes. One can understand it in perfect detail, but it doesn't mean we make any changes. So realization and the truth don't necessarily help us. We actually have to follow it through with action. And another thing going on this weekend, which I think is pretty important, is the fact that Mars is changing sign. I mean, Mars is 0 degrees Gemini. So as far as exactly when Mars changes sign, if you're interested, Mars changes sign on Saturday at 9:43 p.m. London time. So, okay, if you're in Australia, New Zealand, or Eastern Asia, then the sign change will be on Sunday. But we can safely say that Mars changes sign this weekend, and that is a big deal for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think we can safely say that the Mars-Uranus conjunction, which we've been talking about a lot, is over, and we're moving into something else. Mars is in Gemini. It's actually now moving towards a conjunction with Jupiter. It will slowly get there. And so with Mars in Taurus, Mars was in its detriment. Mars is not particularly comfortable being in Taurus. It's all a bit slow for Mars. Mars likes things to be faster. Mars wants to take action, but then having to deal with the material world, and just things take time. But then Mars moving into Gemini, it's more action orientated for Mars. Okay, it's not a fire sign, but with an air sign, it's got some scope for movement. And with Mars in Gemini, a lot of emphasis can go into communication, talking a lot, perhaps. If you can't actually make things happen in terms of getting them to move, you can at least talk about them. And perhaps you think that if you talk enough, you can actually create some kind of movement. And this Mars in Gemini is making a trine to Pluto in Aquarius. So that's a feature of the weekend, probably into early next week. So Mars trine Pluto. This may be a time when we can actually accomplish a great deal without necessarily having to put in a lot of effort. It's just having a goal, having something we want to achieve, we want to do right now, and we are able to focus on it and get it done. And we don't need to worry too much about recognition or people noticing what we're doing. In fact, you could say with Mars trine Pluto that the most important things are going to be done maybe in silence. Pluto does not have to announce itself. And we could be talking about small changes which in the end have a huge impact. Now, the moon does eventually move into Aquarius. And it actually moves into Aquarius on Sunday afternoon, London time. So moon moves into Aquarius 12:43 p.m. around lunchtime in London on Sunday. So that does bring a bit of a change. Firstly, the moon is moving from Capricorn to Aquarius. It's moving from a sort of negative feminine sign into a positive masculine sign. So there's a bit of a change there, though Aquarius and Capricorn are both Saturn-ruled signs. But I think that perhaps when the moon moves into Aquarius, there's a little bit less materialism, perhaps, and less focus on the material world. Now, that reminds us that Mars has moved out of an Earth sign. It's moved from Taurus to Gemini. Moon is moving out of an Earth sign, moving from Capricorn to Aquarius. So what we have on Sunday is that we have a reduction in Earth. All of a sudden, we have a chart with only one planet in an Earth sign, and that is Uranus in Taurus. So that is perhaps a bit of a change, and some of us might find that we're actually not particularly grounded, or perhaps the material world may not be as pressing as it used to be. Though, having said that, the United States has no Earth in its chart, very little Earth in its chart. I think it's got Neptune and Virgo. Donald Trump has got pretty much no Earth in his chart. So sometimes with this lack of Earth, there can be an obsession with Earth because we're obsessed about what we don't have. And so maybe over the weekend we might see people displaying mindless materialism. Materialism, which means nothing, which actually shows a total lack of grounding, but they're just into money and stuff for the sake of it, because they feel they ought to, because they feel they should. But what that perhaps reflects is the fact that there is not really any earth in the sky by the end of the weekend. Now, we do have, on a different note, a sextile between Venus and Jupiter. So Venus is the greater benefic and Jupiter is the lesser benefic. And so Venus-Jupiter sextile, all things being equal, is a pretty fortunate aspect. Things should go well. It may be a good time to be with people, to be enjoying yourself, especially on Sunday. When the moon goes into Aquarius. That's the start of something new, and so perhaps with moon moving into Aquarius, there are things going on, things that are sort of intellectually stimulating. But going back to that Venus sextile Jupiter, it's just generally fortunate, and I'm not saying that we can expect loads of good luck for no good reason, but still, there may just be a happier environment, and perhaps that is a good antidote to all this drama we had at the beginning of the week with Mars conjunct Uranus. I mean, this Mars conjunct Uranus, I sometimes feel that this kind of aspect decides that it's going to focus on one particular thing, and clearly this Mars conjunct Uranus was all about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. That was apparently the line of least resistance. And that has defined what this Mars conjunct Uranus really meant. And the assassination attempt did actually happen 2 days before it was exact. And I think that is a reminder that we shouldn't be totally hung up on exactitude. We need to remember that aspects do have an orb. And this orb, certainly a degree or two, is something we need to bear in mind. And the final aspect of the weekend is a square aspect between Mercury and Uranus. And this Mercury square Uranus could be about excitement. It could be about hasty words. It could be about saying something we later regret. But yeah, there is a sense of excitement with this Mercury square Uranus, and this Mercury square Uranus does really carry us through into the beginning of next week. So I would have said on Monday this Mercury square Uranus is still going to be operational. Now, turning to the heliocentric picture, and it's always important to look at things from a heliocentric perspective, as I will be explaining later, with reference to this blackout that seems to have affected pretty much the whole world, at least airports and I suppose certain things which are security sensitive. So we have, with this heliocentric chart, main theme, Mercury is at 29 degrees Scorpio at this weekend, and it is making a square to Venus. So with Mercury square Venus, heliocentrically, remember this is a heliocentric chart, it is more collective than personal. So with that Mercury square Venus, there could be a struggle to communicate, perhaps an obsession with communicating. And many of us just might feel that there is something we have to say, and if we don't say it now, it could be too late. And I think that we do have the opportunity to say what's on our mind, because it's not just that Mercury is square Venus. Look at the Earth. The Earth is sextile Mercury. So Earth sextile Mercury, Mercury square Venus. There are things that need to be said, and we may feel that there is a certain hurry and even a certain obsession because Pluto is involved. Look at Earth. Earth is starting to move towards a conjunction of Pluto. It's not there yet. We've got a day or two before Earth actually makes a conjunction to Pluto, and also the Earth is sextile Mercury. So that's something we perhaps need to bear in mind. There's something to say, but how do we say it? Mercury, by the way, is not just square Venus, it's also trine Neptune. And so the Mercury trine Neptune may have an otherworldly feel to it as well. Communication takes place on many different levels, and Mercury trine Neptune may be about psychic and telepathic communication. It's also just about knowing what the cosmos wants, where it's going to. So if we are feeling confused, we don't know what's going to happen next, but we really want to know what's going to happen next, perhaps we should just be relaxed and allow that Mercury trine Neptune to make its impact, because we may pick up some useful information about the cosmos and where the cosmos is moving. So that requires some quiet. If we've got a busy day or busy weekend, we're doing lots of stuff and we're worrying about this and worrying about that, we're just not going to understand what's going on. But if we just pause and try to pick up the messages and the chattering of the cosmos, we might start to understand where it's all leading. Okay, that's the heliocentric position, and I'm now going to do my forecast for the weekend for the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of the 20th and the 21st, 2024. Aries. Mars is changing sign. Mars is your ruler. It's moving from Taurus to Gemini. This is a big change, and I would probably regard it as being a fortunate change. It means that you're going to feel, I think, a bit less stuck. You won't feel that things going on out there are just holding you back. You won't feel like that anymore. There'll be less frustration. And to begin with, okay, you may not get immediate results, but I think you'll be able to talk about what you want. And you'll be able to talk a great deal about what you want. And I think that people will listen and they will understand. And you may find that a situation that in the recent past had been really difficult, had just not been going anywhere, suddenly starts to move. You see evidence that action is really happening. And I think that this might be a great relief. And you're helped by the fact that Mars, when it moves into Gemini, it starts making a trine aspect to Pluto. And so Mars trine Pluto means that you're going to be very determined. There are going to be things that you want, and not just things, just perhaps one thing. There could be a certain obsessive quality about Mars trine Pluto, but I don't think that's a bad thing. Sometimes we need to be obsessed. We need to decide that something is important, and then just give it everything we've got. And because it's a trine between Mars and Pluto, it may not be so difficult. It may be it's something we can do in a way that doesn't exhaust us. We can say to ourselves, or well, not we, I'm not an Aries, you can say to yourself that there's something that you want and you'd like it now, and you put the energy in, You perhaps talk to people about it. You tell people what you want. I mean, you can't expect everyone to be a mind reader. You tell people what you want. They listen. You can give them the energy of Mars in Gemini, and sooner or later, things will actually start to move. Now, while this is going on, we do have a full moon. And this full moon takes place in the last degree of Capricorn, and that's relevant for you as an Aries. It means that you're going to have some thoughts, I think, about what you want, what you truly want, what it's all about. And the full moon perhaps shows you the truth of the matter. It maybe challenges some of your pre-existing ambitions. You may perhaps see that what you wanted in the recent past is not what you want now. And that might mean that you do need a change of plan. Now, that kind of contradicts what I've just said, because I said that with Mars trine Pluto, you can get what you want by having a single focus. But what if that focus is being disrupted? What if you're starting to think about too many different things? What if you have doubts? Well, I would suggest, Aries, that if possible, over the weekend and into Monday, you try to make up your mind quickly. I think you actually realize what you should genuinely be focusing on. I think you get it. And the full moon should make it clear, finally. And then, Aries, once you're certain, once you're really focusing on what's important, then, Aries, I think things can really move quickly. So overall, Aries, I think it's potentially quite an important weekend. It's a changeover weekend as Mars moves from Taurus into Gemini, and I think part of the key to getting what you want, aside from the internal process of being sure what you want, you've got to be sure about what you want. You mustn't have any doubts. But part of the key is being able to discuss things with other people, tell people what you're thinking, get some feedback from them, and you will find, I think, that your verbal skills are going to be very effective, and I think you can be pretty persuasive. Taurus, you are starting to become quite ambitious. Well, in fact, you've been ambitious for some time. You've already got Pluto moving through the first degree of Aquarius. Okay, it's true that Pluto does leave Aquarius quite soon and moves back into Capricorn, but it does return to Aquarius. So broadly, it is a time when Taurians have a strong sense of what they want, and they don't want to be opposed. That's Taurus for you. I mean, Taurus is a fixed sign. Once it's made up its mind, it just keeps going. But at the moment, Mars is starting to make a trine to Pluto. Yeah, Mars leaves your sign. I should make that clear. And you might think, oh, well, that's a shame, Mars leaving your sign. It was perhaps great having Mars in Taurus in the sense that it made you quite energized. But perhaps you weren't actually getting as far as you'd like. You were able to take things up to a certain point, but then you did reach a stage where you may have felt that you were somewhat blocked. There were limits, and this Mars conjunct Uranus earlier in the week could have been quite disruptive for you. Yeah, you wanted results, but were you able to get those results as quickly as you wanted them to? Maybe not. But with Mars moving into Gemini, making a trine to Pluto, I think that you're able to be ambitious, and I think you might actually be quite concerned about money. Now, the reason you might start becoming concerned about money is because the Moon and Mars are now leaving Earth signs, and Taurus is an earthy sign, and there's going to be no planets in Earth except for Uranus by the end of the weekend, and you might feel a certain sense of a lack, that something needs to be sorted out with money. It needs to be sorted out right now. And that might bother you, certainly by the end of the weekend. And with Mars trine Pluto, you might be thinking, well, you've got to do something about it. And it might be quite exciting and stimulating. That's perhaps feeling you've got to do something, and perhaps being in a position where you can get good results. On the other hand, you have to be very careful about how you talk about money, how you discuss money, because there may be a sense in which you come over to other people as being a little too obsessed about money. And again, I think that this obsession is being fueled by the fact that there isn't so much Earth in the chart. There are no planets in Earth except for Uranus by the end of the weekend. And so you might be pushed by this lack of Earth into being a bit crude and crass in terms of how you discuss money. So try to be a little delicate when dealing with financial issues. As far as relationships are concerned, the Mars sign change could have an impact. Mars is ruler of Scorpio, your opposite sign. So with Mars moving into Gemini, you might see a change in another person, and that Mars moving into Gemini makes a trine to Pluto. So some people, perhaps important people, at least people who are important to you, could experience some kind of a change, and they may become more decisive and maybe even more intense. So I don't think it's a time to underestimate the people close to you, and I would listen very carefully to what they're saying. They do have things to say which need to be taken seriously. If you trivialize what they're saying, or you don't take seriously their ambitions, then you could be getting yourself into trouble. Now, I don't want to give the impression, though, that it's going to be a difficult weekend. It need not be a difficult weekend. In fact, it can be a great weekend, because we have a sextile aspect between Venus and Jupiter. Venus is your ruler. Venus is in Leo, and it's making a sextile to Jupiter. Jupiter is the planet of good luck. And by the end of a weekend, you may just have a feeling that things can move your way on all levels. Things can move your way in terms of you being happy, you feeling that you're in the right place at the right time. If you put some effort into something this weekend, then it can happen, it can work. So it's important that you don't doubt yourself. It's important that you don't allow yourself to be too negative. Because if you're too negative, then maybe you won't be able to take advantage of that Venus sextile Jupiter, or maybe not. Because I tell you, the problem about an aspect like Venus sextile Jupiter is this: it is a great aspect. It's arguably the most fortunate aspect in the book. Okay, Venus trine Jupiter, but Venus conjunct Jupiter. But the two fortunate planets are making a favourable aspect. So you might expect things to work for you. And I'm sure that loads of astrologers out there are being really, really positive about it. But the problem is that if I just tell you how great things are, that things are just going to happen without you having to do anything, then that might encourage complacency. It is better to take the view that you're going to have to work to get these results. Or perhaps, better still, you should ignore the fact that there's a Venus sextile Jupiter. Because if you're thinking about Venus sextile Jupiter over the weekend and you're thinking about how wonderful it is, the very fact that you're thinking about it is stopping it working. And so if you want to benefit from it, if you want to be lucky in terms of this Venus sextile Jupiter, you should almost convince yourself that it's not going to work. Because, I'm a great believer in the power of negative thinking. It's negative thinking that gets results. I don't think it's positive thinking. Maybe that's because I'm a negative person. It's like Aleister Crowley said, the occultist and magician. He talks about the biggest problem being in magic, being the lust for result. When we really want something, we don't get it. And very often we only get it when we give up on something. So that may give you some idea about how to work with Venus sextile Jupiter. You can't obviously be totally negative, because that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You just have to act as normal, be yourself, and work as hard as possible, create possibilities for yourself. I mean, I suppose the thing is, you can't win the lottery if you don't fill in the lottery ticket, but then I'm not advocating you win the lottery, and certainly Venus sextile Jupiter, if you think it's a good time to play the lottery, I would probably disagree with you. But you've got to create that chance. I mean, I suppose you could say, well, maybe it is the right time to do the lottery, because I suppose if it's not a huge amount of money, because you've got to give Venus sextile Jupiter a chance to work. But it's probably not going to work through a lottery win. It's just going to work through something just happening your way if you give it a chance and you don't get caught up with the lust for result. Gemini. Mars is moving into your sign. And with Mars moving into your sign, you do experience a bit of a change. I think you are going to become quite energized. You feel that things can happen, and you may be more hasty than usual, more impatient, and perhaps you may say what's on your mind, because Mars in Gemini is very communicative, and you may say what's on your mind with a certain amount of passion, I hope. Though what you have to be careful of is, with Mars in Gemini, is saying too much. Mars in Gemini has got a lot to say for itself, and Mars is in a mutable sign now, so there's a certain danger of scattering your energy. So going back to passion is about having perhaps one aim, something that you are really into, something that's really important to. Yes, something that you are passionate about, and giving it everything. And so don't scatter your resources, Gemini. But it's not a time to be sitting on the fence with Mars moving into Gemini. The action is now with you, and this Mars in Gemini is now moving towards a conjunction with Jupiter. Okay, this conjunction with Jupiter doesn't take place exactly for a couple of weeks, but you can still feel it. And over the next couple of weeks, you're going to feel more and more energized. And yeah, it's really important that you get the focus right. And you should try at the same time to be positive. I was talking to Taurus about the importance of this favorable aspect between Venus and Jupiter. You are also impacted by this Venus-Jupiter sextile. It is fortunate. They are fortunate planets. Jupiter is in Gemini. Jupiter is in your sign. Venus is making a sextile to Jupiter. So this is a time when you can be optimistic, positive, happy, and you can brighten your part of the world. At least you could do. Though some Geminis might be feeling a sense that however good things are, they might soon be about to come to an end. And this may actually apply to relationships as well. There's a certain pessimism creeping in for some Geminis in terms particularly of relationships, how you're dealing with the important individuals in your life. You at one sense want to get close to people, but at the other, in another sense, you're asking yourself, what's the point? Because maybe things aren't going to last forever. Now, this may just be Gemini just playing games of itself, perhaps creating an exaggerated feel to what's happening, and there may be almost a sense of tragedy here. And I'm not talking about real tragedy. I'm talking about your perceptions of tragedy. Just in terms of the way you relate, it just may feel that it's some kind of tragic, even almost Wagnerian drama you're in. It's sort of magnificent, but it's all going to end. It has to end. And I'm not quite sure why you're going off on this particular tangent, or maybe you think I'm going on off on a particular tangent, but it's a direction that some Geminis may actually find themselves going down. And it's probably not something you actually talk about, but it may actually impact the way you are relating to other people. So I'm not saying you should totally ignore it. I think that all of us should be aware that life is tragic. Nothing lasts forever. As soon as we're really enjoying things, as soon as we feel we've arrived, really we've come to the end, haven't we? That's always a sign that it just can't get any better from here, that after a point, decline is inevitable. But don't exaggerate it. I think it's just important that you give that Venus sextile Jupiter the opportunity to really work, because I think it can work. And I think that if you don't ask yourself too many questions, then I think you'll come over as being a happy, optimistic person who can, brighten everyone's life. So that's the way forward, I think. So I think it's going to be a good weekend. And I would have said particularly on Sunday. Yeah, I think that Sunday overall is probably going to be a better day than Saturday, because on Sunday, the moon starts moving into Aquarius. Okay. You may not really feel the moon in Aquarius fully until Monday, but Sunday, Monday overall do seem to be better days than Saturday. So, make sure you're in a position to take advantage of everything. Cancer. There is a full moon this weekend, and full moons are important, particularly if you're a Cancerian. And this full moon takes place in the last degree of Capricorn. So that means that we have Moon in the last degree of Capricorn, opposition the Sun in the last degree of Cancer. And this full moon is about the truth. It's about understanding things for how they really are. And some of your understandings may actually relate to other people, the nature of particular relationships. So it might be a time to just consider all the relationships you're involved with and ask yourself where they're going. Now, maybe you reach the conclusion that some relationships aren't actually going anywhere, and perhaps you need to say thank you and goodbye. That is possible. I mean, I'm not talking probably about long-term relationships, but perhaps relationships you've recently got involved with, and I'm not necessarily talking about romantic relationships. It can be any form of relationship, but the full moon does suggest that there is a realization. Now, realizations can take many forms. Realization is not just about realizing that something is over. It could be the realization that something is changing, or it could be the realization that something is just starting. Though we should not forget that this full moon is in the last degree of Capricorn. So last degree does suggest more of an ending rather than a beginning. Though it might not be about people. It may just be, with this full moon, you accept that a particular phase of your life is coming to an end and that you need to move on to something else. Remembering that the Sun in late Cancer, it's about to move into Leo. By the beginning of next week, Sun will be in Leo. That is different. The Cancer season is over, and you have to move on to something else. So, at some level, I think we can say that something really is coming to an end, for better or for worse. Now, one aspect that we do need to consider is the aspect between Venus and Jupiter. Now, I do think that this is a useful aspect, and I think it could affect Cancerians. Now, one reason it might affect Cancerians is because we've got Jupiter involved, and Jupiter does not rule Cancer. Obviously, the moon rules Cancer. But I think that Jupiter does have an affinity with Cancer because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So there's a kind of a link between Jupiter and your sign. And so with Venus sextile Jupiter, I think that this is fortunate, and because we've got Jupiter also in Gemini, which is the sign before Cancer. We've got Venus in Leo, which is the sign after Cancer. So we could kind of say that Cancer is on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. So your sign is on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. And because your sign is on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint, you're in a position to be able to benefit. And so as you move through the weekend, there just may be a sense of optimism, but also a sense of power. A feeling that you are in control, and at the same time, the universe is on your side. And if you put some effort into something, then I think that you're likely to be rewarded. And if we look at what's going on Sunday, the moon changes sign, and it makes a conjunction to Pluto. And this Moon-Pluto conjunction, it's in Aquarius, and it's true that Cancer and Aquarius are very different signs, but I kind of think under the circumstances that it may not be so bad, this moon conjunct Pluto, especially when we have got Venus sextile Jupiter. Moon conjunct Pluto is about your deep awareness of what you want, and you also you're also deeply aware of what you don't want. And it's possibly not something you can articulate, But with Venus sextile Jupiter at the same time as Moon conjunct Pluto, I think that you actually can get what you want. And you can get what you want through maybe just sheer willpower. Leo. The sun is almost there, almost in Leo. Nearly there. Beginning of next week, Monday, sun is in Leo. And from your perspective, that's good news. I'll just tell you, when does the sun move into Leo precisely? Sun moves into Leo at 8:44 p.m. 8:44 p.m. on Monday, London time. So, doesn't matter where you are. Monday, the sun is in Leo, and things should really start moving in your favour. I mean, in many respects, they're already moving in your favour. You've already got Venus and Mercury in Leo, and on Monday, the sun joins it. But it's a weekend. The sun is still in very late Cancer. So, Leo, in spite of possible temptations, you should hold back in some respects. There's something that you shouldn't be revealing that perhaps you want to reveal. Or maybe it's an initiative that you're planning. You just love to discuss it. But it's not a time to discuss things which you regard as being private, secret, or hidden. Just be patient. Though at the same time as all this, Mars is changing sign. Mars is moving from Taurus into Gemini, and I think that could be important from a Leo perspective. And it's all about where you put your energy, isn't it? I think that many Leos over the last 6 weeks or so have been putting energy into maybe getting recognized, getting respected, perhaps your work as being important to you. But with Mars moving into Gemini, perhaps your priorities are changing. It's not enough to put your energy into being successful, because success is so transitory, isn't it? And how do you define success? Maybe it's even a situation where other people are defining success for you, which is kind of no good. But with Mars moving into Gemini, you can take a broader view. You can think about what your priorities are, your long-term priorities. And don't think about it too much. Yeah, there's a temptation with Mars and Gemini to do a lot of thinking and think so much that you get absolutely nowhere. So don't give it too much thought. But I think you do have an awareness, Leo, that it's not just about short-term success, and you need to put your energy into creating something that is more lasting value. But overall, Leo, I think that this weekend is possibly a weekend of two parts. I think that there is this sense of preparation which you need to go through. I think on Saturday, the need for preparation is especially important. There are certain things that are not properly sorted out, and on Saturday it may be necessary to resist the temptation to spend too much time with other people. There is going to be pressure to be with people, perhaps to socialize. I'm guessing that maybe this pressure should be resisted, because there's just something you need to work through, and you need to do it your own way. And it's like there is one final thing to be unwrapped, perhaps. I suppose it's like Christmas, isn't it? There's always one present that is perhaps forgotten, is ignored, and perhaps it never gets unwrapped. But this thing needs to be unwrapped, perhaps on Saturday, and it just may be a surprise. I think a fortunate surprise. You know, you put work into something, you think things are finished, they're not quite finished, then you find something at the last moment, and you put more work into it, and you realize that you've got something that you hadn't planned for. And whatever this thing is, I do think it is fortunate, and it might have a bearing on what you want to do next. You might realize that you have an advantage that you thought you didn't have, and that would be really something to cherish and of course use. Then by the end of the weekend, the moon is starting to change sign, moves from Capricorn into Aquarius. Of course, Aquarius is your opposite sign, and so the moon makes a conjunction to Pluto in Aquarius. It makes a trine to Mars, and so by the time you hit Sunday, things are moving more, and you're going to find perhaps that it's a situation where you maybe do need other people. Perhaps other people can be put to one side on Saturday, but by Sunday, I think you really can benefit from being with the right people. I think that the right people can be really energizing, and they can really set you up nicely for next week. Because remember, next week we've got the sun moving into Leo. In fact, we've got Monday, the sun moving into Leo. And when the sun moves into Leo, you need to make the most of it all, because you know your season is starting, and you want to be there. And also on Sunday, I talked about other people being important. On Sunday, we have a sextile between Venus and Jupiter. Venus, remember, is moving through Leo. It's moving through your sign. It's sextile Jupiter. Jupiter is very sociable at the moment for you. It's, you, I think, enjoy socializing. And while Saturday is probably not a great day for socializing, I think it might be just to be a waste of time. On Sunday and perhaps Monday as well, the social dimension is really important. And I think you can really start to benefit from people. It's not just about having fun. It's about getting insights. And you're able to reconfigure your ambitions for the future based on the input you get from other people. Virgo, you are realistic at the moment, but there's a danger, Virgo, that you're perhaps a little bit too realistic, almost in an existential sense. You might have this feeling that nothing lasts forever. And yeah, that is true. If one is strictly speaking realistic, that is, of course, the conclusion one comes to. But is it really necessary to have to reach that kind of conclusion in terms of guiding your actual actions? So what I'm really saying, Virgo, is there is some danger of excessive pessimism, which is unnecessary. It doesn't actually serve any useful purpose. It's not pessimism based on any new information. It's more about how you perceive the world. It's kind of more cognitive. So you perceive the world in a particular way, and you understand the way things are going, and perhaps you're hyper-realistic. You realize that life, death, and rebirth are just inevitable. Maybe the rebirth is I don't know if a rebirth is inevitable, but I suppose that depends what you believe in. But it's just important not to be too serious and not to think beyond the situation. And you could potentially think beyond the situation when dealing with other people. So, for example, you might be with someone, you might be enjoying their company, and then you're thinking, well, what's going to happen next? I'm enjoying this person's company right now, but soon they're not going to be around. Soon they will have gone somewhere else. So what is the point? And I suppose, yes, you are feeling the transitory nature of things, but I'm not saying that anything special is happening, anything special in terms of being negative. It's just your perceptions, and it's just a passing negativity which you should not allow to take hold. I think that is important. Because actually, Virgo, it can be quite a good weekend. I mean, Mars is moving into Gemini. I think Mars moving into Gemini is great. You know, Gemini is a sign in the Virgo chart which is very high profile. It's to do with your ambitions, what you want to achieve. And Mars moving into Gemini, remember it stays in Gemini for, I think, 6 weeks. When does Mars leave Gemini? Mars leaves Gemini on Mars will move. In fact, Mars leaves Gemini on September the 4th, so early September. So between now and early September, you've got Mars in Gemini, and Mars is in a high-profile sector of your chart. And this is a time when you can achieve a great deal. Okay, you might say, well, it's the summer. What can be done over the summer? Forget the fact that it's the summer. Okay, it's not the summer in the Southern Hemisphere, of course, but it's a time when things can really happen, when you can really push yourself, and you really shouldn't have any doubts. Of course, you will have doubts, perhaps because you're a Virgo, perhaps because Mars is in Gemini. Mars is in Gemini. While it is positive for you, Mars in Gemini can overthink things and can perhaps scatter its energies. That's one danger of Mars in Gemini. So when you're thinking about your plans, say for the next 6 weeks, and what you want to achieve over the next 6 weeks, don't take on too much. Don't, I think, have, for example, 3 or 4 separate paths in which you want to achieve your ambitions, because that's too much. You'll just move from one path to another, and you won't be able to give any one thing enough energy, and then things might not work. So it would be a good idea to just focus on, ideally, just one thing. And I think that should become clear by the end of the weekend, because Mars is trine Pluto. And so with Mars trine Pluto, I'm hopeful, Virgo, that you will have a good understanding of where you need to put the focus. And if you can be a little bit obsessive, that wouldn't be a bad thing. Turning to relationships, and there is a sextile between Venus and Jupiter. Jupiter rules Pisces, which is your opposite sign. Venus is, of course, a natural planet of relationships. So with Venus sextile Jupiter, this may be a time when relationships can work, when you can really benefit from people's company, when other people may have the optimism that you are lacking. So yes, you yourself might be a little bit negative, but perhaps that's only because you've got the shutters down. When you put the shutters up, when you look at what's going on in the world, you'll realize when you talk to people, when you interact with people, that there's not much to be negative about. And you should perhaps treat other people as an example. Find optimistic, happy, enthusiastic people. Look at the way they're dealing with the world. Look at the way they're looking at the way they're dealing with maybe challenges. Challenges that may be far more significant than your own challenges. And that should really give you a sense of real optimism, that if other people can manage, and not just manage, but prosper, then the same goes for you. Yeah, you can manage and prosper. And that's a good way of coming into next week, because I think that next week, you have chances, you have opportunities. At the same time, you perhaps next week have to do a bit of reflecting, because the sun moves into Leo next week, and of course Leo is quite an introspective sign from a Virgo view. So you want to, if you're going to move into a temporary period of introspection, you want to come in move into that period from a position of being as optimistic and positive as possible. And so that is what this weekend is about, especially with that Venus sextile Jupiter. Getting good vibes from other people, making those vibes part of yourself, picking up on other people's enthusiasm and optimism. And I think that can help you, not just this weekend, but over the next week. And that's it, Virgo. Don't be too negative. That's really important. Don't over exaggerate any negative feelings. They're just passing. Things are looking good. Libra. Venus is your ruler, and it is making a sextile to Jupiter. And this Venus sextile Jupiter is really very fortunate. Venus and Jupiter are the two benefics. Venus is the lesser benefic. Jupiter is the greater benefic. And so with Venus sextile Jupiter, I think we can expect things to really move your way, or at least they can move your way this weekend. And I think that there is plenty of scope for you to be happy and fulfilled. So this weekend, it's just very important to make the most of everything that is on offer. So, what does this mean? Well, don't forget other people. I mean, you're a Libran. Other people do matter. And if you can interact with other people, then so much the better. Because I do think that people do really have a great deal to offer, if you give them a chance. But, you're a Libran. You tend to be quite a sociable person. And once the socializing starts, then you can really start to be part of the fun and just benefit as well. It's not just about having mindless fun. It's also about just seeing what people have to offer, because I think they really do have a lot to offer. And perhaps you'll be made aware that things are not quite as simple as they seem. And by that I mean you might think that something is obvious and simple, and you worked out a particular way of seeing things, and then you talk to people and you realize that there are these layers that you hadn't realized, that there are new ways of looking at things. They may seem complicated at first, but when you actually get to grips with them and you actually see and understand what people are talking about, indeed what people are having to offer, you might just have a sense of, not just optimism, but a feeling that you're almost part of a new future. So there's something quite futuristic, perhaps, about this Venus sextile Jupiter. New horizons. Tomorrow has arrived, and you can benefit from it. So Venus sextile Jupiter overall, I think, looks really good. And furthermore, Mars is changing sign. Mars is moving out of Taurus into Gemini. And in a general sense, that's a good thing, because Libra is an air sign. Mars is moving into Gemini, which is another air sign. Mars is making a trine to Pluto in Aquarius. So Aquarius is an air sign. As I said, Mars is in Gemini, which is an air sign. So there's a lot of air going on. And of course, you as an air sign, I think, will greatly appreciate that. And you might notice that some people are undergoing a change. It may be, for example, that recently you've known someone and they have been making things a bit complicated. They haven't really quite been themselves. And that might have concerned you a bit. But now things are changing. Mars, your ruler... Sorry, Mars is not your ruler. Mars is ruler of your opposite sign, of Aries. Mars, ruler of Aries, your opposite sign, is changing signs. So that indicates someone is changing. They are moving into Gemini, out of Taurus. So Taurus is not the best place for Mars. Mars in Taurus is perhaps a little bit too intense, also a bit too stubborn, a bit too focused on itself. But that's now changing because Mars is moving into Gemini, and I do think that is a very good thing. And with Mars in Gemini, you just can be shown a new way of looking at the world. So don't be tied to one particular view, and also don't be tied to any one group of people. You perhaps need some new people in your life, people who have a different perspective, and I do think that you can certainly benefit from that perspective. Now, as far as the pattern of a weekend, I would have said that probably Sunday is more interesting than Saturday. So Saturday, the moon is moving through Capricorn. It's moving through late Capricorn. And with moon moving through late Capricorn, you may not be entirely inclined to do much. Yeah, the opportunities are there, but you just might not feel like it. But then on Sunday, moon moves into Aquarius. When that moves into Aquarius kind of depends on your time zone. This morning, and if you're in the Americas, the moon will move into Aquarius. If you're in Europe, it will be early afternoon. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, it will be late tonight, but don't worry if you're in Australasia, because the moon will move into Aquarius on Monday. So whenever that happens, you will be in a position to benefit, because moon is in Aquarius. It is an air sign. And so when moon moves into Aquarius, whether it's Sunday morning, whether it's Monday morning, it's just a time when you're going to find it easier to interact, and you'll perhaps then be able to really benefit from that Venus-Jupiter sextile. But just to emphasize, if you are in Australia and New Zealand, it is possible that it's Monday that is the key day to be looking at when you can really benefit from that Venus Jupiter sextile. It may not be Sunday, but it all depends on time zone. But so Libra, it's looking like a good weekend where things are changing, and I think that you're in a position to benefit from a change, and it's important not to be stuck in your ways. There are opportunities over the horizon, and you have an opportunity to reach out and make the most of these opportunities. And I think that in the process, other people are going to be very helpful. Scorpio. Mars is changing sign, and Mars is your ruler. So with Mars changing sign, out of Taurus into Gemini. So what did it mean for Mars to be in Taurus? Well, Mars in Taurus is not well placed. Mars is in its detriment in Taurus. And for the last 6 weeks, this is where Mars has been. And you may have felt that maybe you weren't firing on all cylinders, that perhaps things were just a little bit too slow, and at the same time, other people might not have been too helpful. And very recently, there could have been a fair amount of turmoil because Mars in late Taurus was making that conjunction to Uranus, and that conjunction to Uranus has been a big feature of the last week, and it's made things unstable. Okay, there could have been some excitement with Mars conjunct Uranus, but I suspect most Scorpios are going to want to move away from all that. And so then you have Mars moving into Gemini. And I think that Mars moving into Gemini is a good thing for Scorpios. It allows you to escape from certain people and situations who you might have felt were holding you back. And you may have, at the same time, a greater sense of your own power and what you can actually do. Of course, we're talking about something very scorpionic, Scorpio power. Scorpio power comes from the depths, doesn't it? And so with Mars moving into Gemini, that may allow you to reach into the depths, but it's going to be a kind of a bit of an iceberg situation. You've got the part of the iceberg which is above the surface of the water, and you've got most of it which is below the surface of the water. So there's going to be, Scorpio is going to kind of move in two different directions. On one hand, I think many Scorpios are going to be apparently more extroverted, more friendly, better able to deal with other people. And that's what people see on the surface. But then in another way, there's something else going on at a deep emotional level where things are becoming more intense and I suppose more meaningful as well. So what's happening below the surface is just as significant as what's happening above the surface. In fact, it's probably more significant. But you are able to keep smiling. You're not giving the impression that anything is going on, but actually something is going on. And you are becoming more aware of your world, more aware of what needs to be done, perhaps more aware of dangers. There's nothing wrong with being aware of dangers, but that might be how Mars in Gemini, moving into Gemini, occurs to you. And of course, when Mars moves into Gemini, it makes a trine to Pluto. And that trine between Mars and Pluto does give you a huge amount of power. And it's the kind of power that comes from the depths. It's not obvious where this power is coming from. And I don't think other people are aware of what's going on. So it is a weekend, particularly towards the end of a weekend, when you can really start to build up your power, but in a way that no one notices. It actually seems that you're becoming less intense, whereas in actual fact, you are becoming more intense. But it is good that you're able to be friendly, you're able to keep smiling, especially as Venus is making a sextile aspect to Jupiter. Venus is a planet that has a special connection with relationships, at least for Scorpios. And so with Venus sextile Jupiter, you can certainly benefit from other people. And you need to make sure other people do have a certain role in your life. That doesn't mean that you have to give away any power. You just have to give people a chance to be there for you. A chance to be themselves, because when people are themselves, they can start to show what they can offer. And so you can't expect to benefit from people if you, for example, are obsessed with controlling them. Because if you're obsessed with controlling them, then they're not individuals. They're not really in a position to help you. But if you allow people to be free spirits, then you can see what they have to offer. And that is a situation that I think that you can very much benefit from. Sagittarius. Things are changing. I mean, one thing that's changing is the fact that Mars is moving into Gemini. Gemini is, of course, your opposite sign. So with Mars moving into Gemini, that is linked with relationships and how you get on with people. That sign. So with Mars moving into Gemini, you have to be a little bit careful, because between now and early September, I think it's September the 4th, while Mars is moving through Gemini, there is a possibility that you and other people don't quite see eye to eye. There's a chance that there is some kind of conflict. And in terms of relationships, there's a danger that you kind of see things as a power struggle. Well, it's true that you and other people, even people you've known very well, been part of your life for decades, don't see eye to eye on everything. There are always differences. There have to be differences. But these differences may be emphasized. Remembering that the sign Gemini is about differences. Gemini wants to know how one person is different from another person. They want to know about those differences. Maybe Gemini sometimes creates differences that don't actually exist, but that's Gemini, and Mars is in Gemini. Now, you naturally, as a Sagittarian, might be wanting to look at connections rather than differences. That might be you. You don't want to divide the world up. You want to see the big picture. But with Mars in Gemini, your opposite sign is being emphasized. Those differences are much clearer than usual, and you have to work with those differences. Work with in situations where you and another person see things in a completely different way, and somehow that has to be managed, hopefully without there being arguments. But I don't see any reason why this weekend should be full of arguments. Absolutely no reason at all, because Venus is making a sextile to Jupiter. Jupiter's your ruler, Jupiter's in Gemini, and Venus is making a sextile to Jupiter. So that's a very calming influence, and it allows you to be optimistic and to be happy, and also not to be stuck. It's easy to get stuck, isn't it? You can get stuck on one view of the world, on one way of approaching the world, and one can just not be aware of other things going on. Yeah, we get stuck. But with Venus sextile Jupiter, you're seen. You can see new possibilities, other possibilities. And so if you have been feeling a bit stuck, I think that Venus sextile Jupiter can help move you on. And you really should try to work out how other people can help you move on. You're not in isolation right now. You should not be in isolation. It's a time to be open to all possibilities. And that's the nature of being a Sagittarius, being open to all possibilities. I mean, it's also true that Sagittarians can be very moralistic. It's good to have a moral compass, but you don't want to be too moral. You don't want to think that you have a complete understanding of everything, that you've made up your mind and there's no need to consider other possibilities. Now, you've got to be flexible there. And I think that Venus sextile Jupiter is just encouraging you to be flexible and to be taking advantage of other people and the many varieties, the variety they can bring. That's what do they say? It's vive la différence. You've got to think about the difference. Differences are good. And that is, I think, an important theme of the late weekend. And I think it actually might be an important theme of the next 6 weeks. You don't want too much sameness. You want to be challenged by differences. Because, where there's a difference, there is a new possibility. If there are no differences, then it all gets rather boring, doesn't it? Capricorn. We have a full moon this weekend, and we've got the moon in the last degree of Capricorn, making an opposition to the sun in the last degree of Cancer. So this full moon is across the main axis of your chart. Cancer, Capricorn, Capricorn, Cancer. So this full moon may create a few changes in terms of relationships and how you perceive other people. Maybe you'd perceived other people in one way, you'd reached some conclusions, but now with this full moon, you have to reconsider. And that's a good thing. You're able to see people as they are, without any fantasy, without any preconceptions. Just you see them who they are. You see, and as a result, you're in a position to make decisions. Which people can you trust? Which people can no longer be trusted? And I don't think that you should be afraid of making these decisions. And in fact, if you think about it, it's been clear for a long time. And now you've got the full moon, it's obvious. And you really can start to move on. But it just may be that you can see people in terms of their value. It's not just a negative thing, it's full moon. Perhaps you realize that a couple of people can be really useful, can be really helpful. And in terms of trust, I think over the last couple of weeks, you have been able to develop a sense of your own trustworthiness. And I think now certain people trust you in a way that they really didn't before. And so that is something that I think that you can benefit from this trust, but you're also in a position where you can really make people's lives a lot better because they now trust you. And because if someone trusts you, then they're prepared to listen to what you say and they're prepared to listen to your suggestions. And so I think that is really very positive. Now, one thing that is happening this weekend is that Mars is moving into Gemini. So with Mars moving into Gemini, there is a change in terms of how you are defining your creativity. Because, Mars has been in Taurus, and with Mars in Taurus, I'm hoping that over the last 6 weeks, Capricorn, you've been able to find things that really interest you. New things. Or at least a new interest. Okay, the things themselves might have not have been new, but your approach might have been new. And I'm just hoping that you've now developed a greater sense of what your special talents are. And that might have been quite fun, realizing what you can do. But now with Mars moving into Gemini, there is a bit of a change. So if you want to keep something, if you want to maintain an interest, it is going to require more work. And that's not a bad thing. But it's not just going to be about enjoyment, having fun, playing with one interest, playing with another interest. It's going to be a little bit more intense, if that's what you want. And I suppose there's some danger here that you lose something. When I say lose something, it might mean that you have developed a skill up to a point. And with Mars moving into Gemini, you might drop the skill. You might stop practicing, stop working on it. Perhaps you regard it as being trivial, waste of time, and you need to move on. There are other things to worry about. I would suggest that you don't do that. So consider what you're interested in now, what you're fascinated by, what's got your attention. And also consider how you might give it up. And then ask yourself, do you really want to give it up? Because I suspect you don't. And so perhaps over the next month, you might have to make a special effort to work on something in order to keep it alive, to keep it as a vibrant part of your life. And it may be boring, it may be tedious, it may be that there are other pressures that you're supposed to give into, but keep it going. Keep the flame of your creativity going over the next 6 weeks. And, then I think by September, you'll be in a better position to make it a permanent part of your life. Now, another thing about Mars in Gemini is that over the next 6 weeks, and particularly now, particularly over the next couple of days, some danger that you might push yourself too hard in one or two areas. You might feel that you have to put in a huge amount of work in order to get something done, and in the process you could exhaust yourself. There could be almost a certain sense of nervous exhaustion. I'm not I'm not saying anything medical or clinical. There's just a sense that you could push yourself too hard with Mars moving into Gemini. And you have to get the balance right. It's nice that Mars is trine Pluto, because Mars trine Pluto allows you to put in the work, allows you to be very focused. But if you're too focused, you might actually forget about your body, because your body matters. Now, you're a Capricorn, you're an earth sign, and of course, under normal circumstances, you have a good sense of your own body. But what's happening is that the moon is moving out of Capricorn into Aquarius, and we've got Mars moving out of Taurus into Gemini. So that means we've got no planets in Earth except for Uranus, but that's a generational planet. And so, Capricorn, there's some danger over the next couple of days that you kind of forget your body, and you find that you can do stuff, you do what you have to do, a lot of energy, but in the process you could really grind yourself down. So just bear in mind that there's a certain tendency, I think, to not put a priority, to not give your physical well-being the priority it should be given to. So make sure that you make a special effort to look after yourself on a physical level. I'm not trying to frighten you or anything. I'm just making a suggestion. If you find yourself pushing something too far, then just pull back, and then everything will be fine. No need to worry. Aquarius. The moon is on a point of moving into Aquarius, and this sign change happens on Sunday, Sunday morning, perhaps even early Sunday morning if you're in the Americas, around lunchtime. If you're in Europe, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, it's this evening or even early tomorrow morning. But sometime over the weekend or into Monday, the moon will be moving into Aquarius. And when it moves into Aquarius, it makes a conjunction with Pluto. And it also makes a trine to Mars. So I think Aquarius, this does give you a great deal of energy, and it allows you to make things happen, and it allows you to also to engage the full power of your personality. And it's not just the fact that the moon is moving into your sign, it's also the fact that Mars is moving into Gemini and Mars is making a trine to Pluto. So we've got this trine involving air signs, Aquarius to Gemini. So that really makes you strong. So really consider how you're going to make the most of it. And remember, it's more, by the way, it's more Sunday rather than Saturday. So the weekend might start off slowly on Saturday as the moon is moving through late Capricorn. But as you move into Sunday, things really do start to move. And you perhaps have a certain sense of mission, that there is just something you really want to do and you just don't want to compromise. And it's a key part of yourself. You matter. Your creative self does matter. And Mars moving into Gemini, that is incredibly creative. And it's not just moving into Gemini, and it's also moving to a trine to Pluto. It is starting to move to a conjunction of Jupiter, which happens in a couple of weeks' time. So it's a time, Aquarius, to do what you do best, whatever it is. And I think that you can really do an excellent job. And a little bit of obsession might actually be a good idea, because focus is what matters. And if you're unfocused, you're not going to get anywhere. But, as an Aquarius, as a fixed sign, I think that you really do understand the importance of focus. Now, it is possible that you actually don't need anyone's help, that you can do everything on your own, and other people's input is just irrelevant. And so if you want to spend the weekend alone, that's probably okay. Yet Venus is making a sextile to Jupiter, and Venus is in Leo. It's in your opposite sign. So Venus is a very relationship orientated planet, especially in Leo, especially for Aquarians, and it is sextile Jupiter. And that Venus sextile Jupiter does indicate that you can not just benefit from other people's company, but you can attract people's company. So I don't actually think that you need be alone this weekend, especially late weekend, Sunday, perhaps into Monday. There's actually no need to be alone. I think that you'll make good company, and at the same time, I think that your fundamental genius will be appreciated. So appreciation is actually important for Aquarians. They're sometimes in denial about it, because Aquarius is supposed to be a very detached, objective sign ruled by Saturn. But every sign has its reflex, and its reflex is in the opposite sign. And of course, the opposite sign to Aquarius is Leo. So even if you deny it, you do need some appreciation. You want some praise. And I think this weekend with Venus sextile Jupiter, praise and appreciation are very much available. And if praise is available, you should take it. It's good to be praised. And so I think Aquarius, you should be trying to look for perhaps new fans, old fans as well. People want to like you, they want to appreciate you. You can be popular, and the world needs Aquarians, and you can give a world back whatever the world wants to give you. But the most important thing perhaps is interacting with other people. Okay, I've just said earlier that you don't actually need other people. You don't need other people. If you don't want other people, if you're happy doing things on your own, then you can accomplish a lot and it will be fine. But I think you could accomplish so much more if you made some effort to engage with other people. If you, not everyone, not the whole world, but there are just certain people who really appreciate you and who perhaps want to show that appreciation. Pisces, you are possibly not feeling in the first instance that you really want to do very much. I mean, that's your immediate inclination. You know, you understand that there are things happening, there are people around you, but really, can you be bothered? And in fact, as the weekend progresses, as you move into Sunday, this might actually intensify. You might just take the view that really the world is too complicated, and you perhaps have limited amounts of energy, and as the moon moves into Aquarius on Sunday, it makes a conjunction to Pluto. It may just feel that you just want to do things your own way, and that's fine. And I think that you'll perhaps also be made even more focused on yourself by the fact that Mars is moving into Gemini. So on Sunday, Mars, well, it depends on the time zone, doesn't it? I make it when does Mars move into Gemini? Mars moves into Gemini on okay, if you're in Europe, that will be on Saturday evening, and it will be earlier, sort of maybe sort of lunchtime, afternoon, if you're in the Americas. So Saturday, Mars is moving into Gemini, and that might slow you down even more. You're just feeling that perhaps you need to just put your energy into your home, perhaps, or just creating a nice safe space for yourself, and that's the way it can be, and you don't really have to worry about anything else. Yet Venus is making a sextile to Jupiter. Venus sextile Jupiter is arguably the most fortunate aspect in the book. I mean, it's a sextile. Sextiles are a nice aspect. They don't have the laziness of a trine, and they don't have the tension of a square. So you put a little bit of effort in and you get a lot back. And so with Venus sextile Jupiter, Venus is the lesser benefic. It's a fortunate planet. It's sextile Jupiter, which is ruler of your sign, of Pisces. So with Venus sextile Jupiter, I think that you're in a position to, I think, benefit from people, or at least one or two people. You can interact with them, and I don't actually think you have to do very much. It's not a big effort, actually, to benefit from other people or to be with other people. In a way, it's them having to make the effort. I think people are prepared to come to you. People are prepared to do things your way. You don't have to change your routines. Other people are quite happy to change their routines. And so that is quite a fortunate state of affairs. So you can enjoy people's company, benefit from people's company without having to give anything away, which is a situation which is probably perfect, isn't it? And so that's especially on Sunday. And so do take advantage of that. And also remember, it's so important to remember you don't have to make any changes. You do have a particular routine for yourself this weekend that you kind of want to follow. And I think that with this Venus sextile Jupiter, no one's going to interfere with a routine. Everything happens on your terms. At least it can happen on your terms. I mean, there's no reason why you can't be a little bit flexible. But if you don't want to be flexible, then Pisces, that's absolutely fine. Though one warning, if I were to give you a warning, I would have said that you need to consider some of your plans. I think there seems to be something you're planning, something you want to do quite soon, and you think that it's all in order and you think you've got everything's clear. I don't think that's necessarily the case. Some of the assumptions of your plan are a bit muddy. You kind of know they're muddy. And you're perhaps just assuming that just everything's going to work out. Well, I don't think that is actually an assumption you can make. And so, given this situation, Pisces, it might be a good idea if you focus on these areas which are unclear, where you just are leaving things to chance. Just focus on them and do some research and work out where the problem is and how the problem can be fixed. I think the problem can be fixed. I don't think it's a super serious issue, but if you can clear up a few factual issues, then I think that you could be saving yourself a lot of trouble at a later stage. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I'm now going to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend of July the 20th and 21st going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was number 48, which is the well. And the well represents something which is always there. It doesn't change. There have been wells forever, haven't there? I mean, society needs wells. Humans need wells. It doesn't matter how modern things are. 21st century, we still need wells. People needed wells thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. So a well represents something which is always there. And in many ways, the well represents our abilities, the things about us which are always there. So what is it about you which is always there? And it's nothing that has to be refilled. Okay, I know that in practice wells are running dry, there is a global water shortage, aquifers are being drained, and many wells are just simply not providing what they should be providing. But let's not get too real about it. Let's not get too focused on surface concerns. The well is of something symbolic. It is always there. The water is always there. And our abilities, our talents, who we are, doesn't matter how things are changing. Doesn't matter, governments change, circumstances change, but who we are and what we can offer is always there. So there's no danger here of it running out. So if you, for example, are involved in an activity which represents just a fundamental part of your talent, who you are, what you can do, it's not going to run out. Okay, I know you could exhaust yourself, but it's something that can be demonstrated all the time. It's not something you have to conserve or keep to yourself. And this is what the well is all about. And we have a moving line here, the fifth line moving line that moves, which is very fortunate. And one view of the fifth line is it's like a well, and it represents our wisdom, and it's just available to everyone. And so it seems that over the weekend we have a huge amount to offer, and we should not try to restrict it or to ration it, because you're dealing with something which is infinite. Then there's no need to ration it. So in terms of that special ability, we can almost be infinitely generous. Of course, we don't want to exhaust ourselves. There've got to be limits to it. And there's also the possibility that we can change the way we are showing the world what we can do. But we can change the way we are giving. And so there is a view that it's actually about opening a new well. So the old well's working very well, but perhaps we can shift our attention and open a new well. There may actually be a new way in which we can make the world a better place. So if we've been used to dispensing advice or perhaps being a good example, we can actually take things to the next step. So I suppose the overall theme is about generosity. And it's a kind of generosity where we shouldn't be worried about giving away too much. And of course, this is not financial generosity. It's in a sense the generosity of spirit, the generosity of example. And this hexagram, the well, it does move, and it moves to hexagram 57. And with this hexagram, I think that we can help people to understand what is wrong. That's one way of looking at it, because this hexagram 57, the gentle, is about the wind. It's about moving from place to place, and also understanding where there's a problem, where there's rot, where there's decay, where there are evil forces at work, for example. And I think that we can perhaps show people how to find the evil perhaps within themselves and within the world at large. And I think that will be really very much appreciated. So if something is not right with the world, and if something's not right with other people's world, then in our inexhaustible, generous kind of way, we can help people to understand it, to get to the bottom of the issue, and to, I think, in the end, resolve it. So, that's the weekend. And there is a sense, by the way, with this, is that we shouldn't be thinking too much about ourselves. It's not a time to be selfish, really. Instead, it is a time for being generous, certainly with our time and our energy. Although, of course, we don't want to actually sort of reach a stage where we run out of energy, about our limits. But as far as possible, we should be unselfish, and we shouldn't really be thinking about our ego. It's about perhaps putting ourselves at the service of other people and the world around us, and helping everyone to benefit, and helping everyone to resolve their particular worries and problems. And that's the I Ching. And I now want to consider this blackout. I don't really know much about it, because I was preparing to do this video, and I just wanted to see what was happening in the world, and I looked at the comments on my channel, and there'd been mention of this blackout. And so this blackout, it took place across the world. I mean, there was a comment relating to Australia. Lisa Michelle mentioned Australia. Sujata mentioned it from another perspective. And when you actually look at what's going on, it's in the UK. They were saying that some news channel had blacked out at sort of 6 a.m. They had to stop. And so this seemed to be a big event. And it was about a security patch that Microsoft, or this company, I think it's called CrowdStrike, had put out. And anyway, this patch didn't work, or it caused a complete disaster. And apparently it's the biggest outage ever. So you would have thought that astrologically we would be able to understand what happened. Now, this should show up astrologically, shouldn't it? So I don't have an exact time for when this happens. So I'm just going to start with one chart, and I've gone for Microsoft blackout. I've set this for London, but don't worry about that too much. They were saying, I think, something like Sky Television blacked out or had to stop, didn't go on the air at 6 a.m. London time, but don't worry too much about this. So we might notice that the moon is making a square to Neptune. Now, the moon makes a square to Neptune pretty regularly. It's not in itself a particularly unusual event. And so moon in Sagittarius. I mean, moon in Sagittarius gives us the idea of something of a fairly global nature. It doesn't have any bounds. It makes a square to Neptune. It's making a square to Neptune, and it's on the Aries point. Now, but Neptune has been on the Aries point for some time. I mean, it's almost permanently on the Aries point. Okay, Neptune is quite close to Skeet, the planet of disasters and shipwrecks. But really, is that quite enough? So I think the moon square Neptune might give us an idea of timing, when the blackout really started to happen. But I don't think it really explains the blackout. Then we've got Uranus conjunct Mars. I mean, that is, you could say, pretty obvious. Uranus conjunct Mars. It's not exact, though, that conjunction. In fact, it's 2.5 degrees apart. Mars is no longer on Algol. Actually, Uranus is very strongly on Algol. How close is Uranus to Algol at the moment? Let me just check that. But it's not. I mean, it's it is very close. So let's have a look at some fixed stars. So Uranus is 4 arc minutes from Algol. I don't know if there are any other super exact fixed stars. Yeah, there you can see that Neptune is conjunct Skeet, 8 minutes. But so Uranus and Neptune are close to some quite nasty fixed stars. That is true. But again, why now? So that doesn't. I don't think that fully explains the situation. We might want to consider Uranus's midpoint. This midpoint. I mean, Uranus is a planet connected with disruption. You'd think of blackouts relating to Uranus. So, if one looks at Uranus's midpoints, Uranus was aspecting the Mercury-Mars midpoint at the time of the blackout. So that's one thing to consider. You might also consider Mercury is on the Sun-Saturn midpoint. So Mercury is not exactly on the Sun-Saturn midpoint, but still Mercury on the Sun-Saturn midpoint might relate to blocked communication simply not working. Uranus on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. Mercury-Mars is, I suppose, a struggle to communicate, trying to communicate, but it just something kind of going wrong. So these are a few ways of looking at it, but it's not entirely satisfactory, I don't think. I think we need to look at things in from another perspective. And I think if we really want to understand this blackout, as Lisa Michelle suggested in her comment, we should probably be looking at the heliocentric picture. And so let's look at it from a heliocentric view. And there it is. That's the heliocentric picture when the blackout happened. So there's Mercury at 2413 Scorpio, and there's Uranus, which is opposition Mercury, and Uranus is at 2352 Taurus. So that means that Mercury and Uranus are less than half a degree apart from the opposition. So Mercury-Uranus completely describes a blackout, doesn't it? Mercury at the attempt to communicate, Uranus, something happening, disrupts the whole thing. Now, I did point out this Mercury-Uranus opposition when I looked at the position, when I was looking at the heliocentric picture for Friday, but I'm afraid I didn't say it was a blackout. I should have been a little more imaginative and worked a bit harder with the symbolism, I think. I think one could have predicted this kind of event, obviously not this precise kind of event, but I think it just fits the symbolism really well. And we have Venus on the T, so we have a heliocentric T-square with Venus square Mercury, Venus square Uranus. So Venus, we could regard Venus as a trigger. We could regard Venus as perhaps a universal significator of people trying to communicate with each other. And we have this blackout. And so Venus square Uranus, Venus square Mercury. And that gives us the idea of a communication breakdown, and not helped by the fact that the Earth is quincunx Venus. So the Earth is, what's happening on planet Earth, and we can't communicate, and we can't communicate with other people because it's Venus. So the point I'm making here is that if we're trying to predict global events, we should never ignore the heliocentric picture. It is a heliocentric chart that describes a blackout better than the geocentric chart, and it describes it in a way that is much simpler. Still, it would have been difficult to predict it beforehand, but I think one should have said there could be some global Mercury-Uranus event at the time of this blackout, and I possibly should have tried a bit harder in terms of me describing that blackout when I was looking at this heliocentric picture, when I was looking at Friday's astrology. So the lesson of that is you can't ignore the heliocentric picture. Now, that raises the question as how do you get in touch with the heliocentric universe, the heliocentric solar system? Because most ephemeриdes, most chart calculation packages on the internet, as far as I understand it, they don't have heliocentric options. But if you go to astro.com, the website there, they have ephemeриdes for everything. Ephemeris is just a PDF showing all the positions of the planets every single day, and they have all sorts of ephemeриdes. And you can download a heliocentric ephemeris, which will give you the daily heliocentric positions. So there is no real excuse not to look at the heliocentric picture. So that's the blackout. I'm sorry I'm not saying more about it, but I only just found out about it as I was just about to make this video, so I didn't really have a chance to really read about it, but I did want to cover it right now. And now I want to turn to JD Vance, because we know what time he was born. And I think JD Vance, I get the impression he is an important person, not just because he is Donald Trump's vice presidential pick, but he's young. He perhaps represents the future of the Republican Party, where right-wing politics are moving in the United States, and he's likely to be around for a few decades to come. So here is his chart. Now we know that he was born at 8:11 a.m. and his chart has Regulus rising. Okay, not exactly rising, but Regulus is what, 29 something Leo. Regulus tends to have quite a wide orb. I mean, I think you can perhaps go as far as 5 degrees apart, but so you don't have to. It doesn't have to be exactly on Regulus, but he's got Regulus rising, and of course Regulus is the royal star. It's to do with high position, and having Regulus rising for him is a big advantage. And he's got the sun in Leo, so the ruler of his ascendant is the sun. Okay, you could say that the sun is in the 12th house if you were to use the Placidus house system. Of course, if you're using the whole sign house system, you'd say he's got sun rising, he's got sun in the first, and sun in Leo in the first. So I do think that is a really quite strong sun. Now that we know what the degree of his ascendant actually is, and he's got Venus rising. So with Venus rising, here is someone who is popular, can be popular, knows how to project himself. George Bush Jr. had, I think, Venus in Leo in the first house. So that seemed to work quite well for him. Let me just look at George Bush Jr.'s chart. I wasn't going to look at it, but here's George. Just for the sake of comparison, Yeah, here's George Bush's chart. He had Leo rising and Mercury rising, but he had Venus at 21 Leo. So in fact, JD Vance's Venus is actually pretty close to George Bush's Venus. So maybe at some level he has a similar ability to attract votes that George Bush Jr. had, although I think George Bush Jr. and JD Vance are different people. I think JD Vance is a lot more intelligent than George Bush Jr. And of course, JD Vance came from a humble background. He wrote his biography about him, Hillbilly Elegy. He certainly didn't have the advantages that George Bush Jr. had. But I think that it's pretty amazing that George Bush Jr. got elected president. And I think some of the charisma of his Venus in Leo must have helped, and so JD Vance has it as well. So I do think that Venus rising is really useful. North Node in the 10th in Gemini. North Node is where he's supposed to be going. Now, with North Node in the 10th, okay, I understand that from a whole sign point of view, that would be in the 11th, but the North Node is relatively close to the midheaven. So I would feel that North Node very much had a 10th house feel to it. And that's where he's supposed to be going. That's his path forward. So if he wants to be president, that's the right thing for him to want to do. If he wants to be vice president, I don't think that is an unreasonable ambition with that North Node. But now we know that what his ascendant is. Of course, we know what his midheaven and his IC is. And so what is fascinating is the fact that he has Mars at 22 degrees 32 Scorpio. It's a strong Mars in Scorpio in its own sign, but that Mars is conjunct his IC. And Mars conjunct the IC can be a little bit scary. When you're dealing with people who have the Mars conjunct the IC, you often have to tread carefully. Because if you get too close, they can react. You perhaps say something without, that's mildly offensive, or you pry too much. If you try to investigate this Mars on the IC, Mars can explode in your face. So that there may be a certain touchiness to that Mars on the IC that we haven't seen yet. But maybe we'll never see it. But Mars on the IC does it, and he's got a sort of very wide Mars-Saturn conjunction. But that Mars on the IC, in spite of his high profile, suggests to me that in fact he's actually quite a private person, or he should be quite a private person. His home and his family, and I suppose one could perhaps extend that to the politics of the thing. So my understanding of his politics is that he sort of has an America First view, if I've got that right, that it's all about America. You don't have to worry about America in a global sense, America having to be involved in international bodies and in international conflicts. It's all about America and America's interests. And you have to be careful with climate change legislation, because international climate change legislation, because the United States might agree to restrict its greenhouse emissions, but what about China? What about India? You've got to put your country first. I mean, I'm not saying that is the case, by the way. I'm just trying to say that might be how JD Vance is thinking. And that Mars on the IC, that's all about perhaps putting one's country first. That might be it. That might help to explain it. So those are a few points about his natal chart. We can say, by the way, his moon, now we can say for sure his moon is at 2925 Libra. So Pluto at 29 29 Libra, so sort of a Moon-Pluto conjunction, but quite a wide Moon-Pluto conjunction. So at first we could say, well, no, we can't really count that as a conjunction. But his Uranus is semi-square his Moon-Pluto midpoint. And so with Uranus semi-square the Moon-Pluto midpoint, this may be someone who is able to recreate himself on a regular basis, perhaps even. Uranus is about the sense of drama and wanting a sudden change. And the Moon-Pluto, I suppose that says something about his childhood, and I hope it was really difficult, but he's able to explode beyond his childhood, explode beyond his background. And so maybe that's one way of looking at Uranus on the Moon-Pluto midpoint. I don't know what Ebertin says about Uranus on the Moon-Pluto midpoint, whether it's at all useful. Uranus on the Moon-Pluto midpoint. Well, this is actually quite an interesting one. Uranus on the Moon-Pluto midpoint. Ebertin says about Uranus hitting the Moon-Pluto midpoint. Let me just tell you what the actual orb on this is. So there is his Uranus on the Moon-Pluto midpoint. It's only 11 minutes orb, so it's a very close semi-square to the Moon-Pluto midpoint. So Ebertin says about this, an extremely emotional life, fanaticism, the desire to fight, the urge to do something, nervous crises through excesses, sudden upsets. So the indication here is this is someone who is extreme and who is not happy with the way things are, wants to create change. And I think that sort of fits him to a certain point, to a certain level. Then as far as other midpoints are concerned, going back to his midpoint, he has Pluto on the Sun, Moon, and the Moon, Saturn midpoint. So he is very much a Pluto person. So whatever you've got on your Sun, Moon midpoint, if you've got something on your Sun, Moon midpoint, because he's got Pluto is not conjunct, it's going to be a semi-square sesquiquadrate to his Moon, Pluto, Sun, Moon midpoint. So he really is a Pluto person. He is able to recreate himself in quite regularly. So I suppose he comes from a poor background. He recreates himself by going into the army, recreates himself by going to university, Yale Law School, writes a book, and that Pluto is really very powerful. And it also, I think, is quite hard-working. If you remember, the thing about Vance is that if you look at his chart, he has got, I'm just about to go back to Pluto, look at how he's got a very close Sun-Saturn square. So looking at his chart from the perspective of the 90-degree dial, so remember, 90-degree dial, conjunctions, squares, oppositions all become conjunctions, semi-squares and sesquiquadrates become oppositions. So looking at his Pluto tree, the symmetry of his... So let's move the pointer to Pluto. Let's make that a bit smaller. So there's his Pluto tree, and you can see this. You can see the symmetry there. There is his Sun Saturn square. It becomes a conjunction because it's on a 90-degree dial. So there's his Moon on the Pluto on the Sun-Moon midpoint, Pluto on the Moon-Saturn midpoint. So he's someone who is able to really blast through whatever is restricting him. And so I think that Pluto tree is really quite powerful. He's also got Pluto on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint, and so it's Venus-Jupiter's on that tree. Venus-Jupiter is, of course, a very fortunate pairing to do with things working out, things working well. Pluto on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint is about power and about powerfully making it happen. So I think his Pluto midpoint tree is really significant there. And yeah, the fact he's got Pluto on the Sun-Moon midpoint just tells us what kind of person we're dealing with. Now, what is kind of a bit incredible about JD Vance's chart is how it links with Trump's chart. So, Trump, let's find Trump. Here's Donald Trump. Donald Trump has also got his ascendant in late Leo. So their ascendants line up. So if we basically put, let's put Donald Trump in the inner wheel. We'll put JD Vance on the outer wheel. So there are their two charts. Trump in the middle, Trump on the outer wheel. Vance's ascendant is at 27 Leo. Trump's ascendant is at 29 Leo. So they both have Regulus rising. Of course, Donald has Regulus strongly rising. Vance's Venus, as I said last time I looked at Vance's chart, Venus is on Trump's Mars. I think we're now starting to make sense of that. I think that is quite a beneficial influence on Trump. It sort of helps calm him down, perhaps remove some of his rough edges, even though Vance may not himself be a particularly calm person. He's quite a high energy person. But we're talking about the synastry between the two people. And then their midheavens are in the same places. You know, Vance's midheaven is at 22 Taurus, and Trump's midheaven is at 24 Taurus. So in a way, what happens to Trump, it kind of also happens to Vance. So these two people are very connected with each other. And then there is the issue of Mars. Now, I already knew that Vance's Mars was on Trump's IC, but now I didn't know that Trump's IC is obviously by definition on JD Vance's IC. So that Mars is right on Trump's IC, and I don't know. I mean, I think there's probably going to be friction in the end, but with Mars hitting Trump's IC, I think it may be that Vance will clash in the end with Trump's family members. Trump's family do kind of get involved with things. They like to get involved, don't they? This clash might not happen until after the election, but I think that there is a potential there. So if I was advising them, I would just say, be very careful about how Vance interacts with Trump's family. I mean, at the moment they think Vance is great, but Vance clearly has his opinions. He's not just there for the ride, is he? So we'll have to see how that works out. So I think that is about it. I probably should look at Vance's solar returns now. I mean, I've already looked at Vance's solar returns, but I did not have his time of birth. But now he's got, in fact, I also want to look at Vance's Vedic chart. I will be looking at Vance's Vedic chart. So Vance's solar return for 2023. So this is the solar return he's currently in at the moment. I don't think that this solar return is particularly impressive. I wouldn't even have said it was especially good, except the fact that, as you know, he has got Venus at 26 Leo, so he's got Venus on Trump's Mars in his 2023 solar return. South Node on the midheaven. Yeah, that is not great, I suppose. But this solar return is about to come to an end. It's now July the 19th. He's going to be 40 on August the 2nd. So on August the 2nd, he's going to move to a new solar return. And so perhaps that is what we should be looking at. So this is his solar return for his solar return for his year ahead. And what strikes me about this solar return is the moon. He's got moon exactly on the IC, right there at the bottom of the chart, and the moon is at 1326 Cancer. So 1326 is, of course, the degree of America's sun. The sun, if you take the view that sun was born, but America was born on July the 4th, 1776. So it's all about America, isn't it? With that moon conjunct the IC. And I don't know. I suppose that's a good thing. I mean, I'm not 100% convinced by it. Yeah, I suppose it is. I mean, it does mean for his solar return, emotionally, he's going to relate to America, and I think America is going to relate to him. Also, at the time of his solar return, the sun, there's sun in Leo. Sun is making a sextile to Jupiter. And so Sun, ruler of a fifth in this chart. So Sun sextile Jupiter may indicate success. So that's certainly a possibility. But I don't think that we would just look at a solar return and say, well, that gives us the answer. And finally, I want to consider Vance's chart from a Vedic perspective. So I set up his Vedic chart because with Vedic astrology, you really do need a time of birth. So I wasn't able to look at his Vedic chart before because I just didn't have a time of birth. But now we've got a Vedic chart, so we can look at it. So here is Vance's Vedic chart, and so things do change a little bit, because remember, everything moves back around 23 degrees. So he's no longer got the sun in Leo. He's got the sun. He's got his sun in. He's got his sun in Cancer. He's no longer. Well, no, he's still got Leo rising because he's got Mercury rising. He's got Mercury in the first house in his Western and Eastern charts. So that's that doesn't change. Now, in terms of his strongest planet, using the system of Shadbala, his strongest planet is Saturn. There is his Saturn in the third house. Remember, this is Hindu astrology, so that's first, second, third. Now, he's got Saturn in Libra in the third house. So his Saturn moves in Western astrology. It was in Scorpio, but it goes back into Libra. So, in other words, in his Eastern chart, Saturn is exalted. So, Saturn is strong in that sense. Okay, Saturn is in the same sign as Mars. Mars may weaken Saturn, but still, Saturn is the strongest planet in his chart. In his, you can't see even. I think you can see the Navamsha chart. But in his Navamsha chart, he's got Saturn in the 11th. So Saturn is in the 9th division chart. It's Saturn in 11th. Saturn in Aquarius. He's got Saturn in Aquarius in his Navamsha chart. So Saturn in Aquarius in his Navamsha. Saturn which is in, of course, the sign of its rulership. and he's got Saturn in Libra in his natal chart. And the third house is, I think it's described as an upachaya house, which means it's a growing house, it's a growth house. And malefics in upachaya houses do work well. So I think that Saturn is quite well placed. And it's important that we understand that Saturn is quite well placed, even though Saturn is conjunct Mars. I mean, I think that Saturn-Mars conjunction will at some stage cause problems, but is it going to cause any problems anytime soon? So then we have to think about what planetary periods he is in. Now, in 2008, I make it in April 2008, he entered his Jupiter period. So you can see, I hope you can see that. And so, entering his Jupiter period, he was, I believe, in 2008. I think he was finishing his bachelor's degree. I think he finished his bachelor's degree in 2009. Then he went to Yale, and then just everything happened pretty much. So things really worked for him after 2008. Now his Jupiter is, in some respects, very well placed. He's got Jupiter in Sagittarius. Remember, he's got Jupiter in Capricorn in his Western chart, but it goes back into Sagittarius in his Eastern chart. And so Jupiter is in the sign of its rulership. Okay, Jupiter is retrograde, but I think in Vedic astrology, retrograde is not seen as such a big problem as it is seen as in Western astrology. I wouldn't worry too much about Jupiter being retrograde. But the thing is, Jupiter is not just in Sagittarius, it's in the fifth house. And the fifth house is a Purva Punya house, which is, I think, related to past life credit. So yeah, that kind of fits as well, doesn't it? You think of all the credit, if you assume he believes in reincarnation. Well, his wife believes in reincarnation, I assume, because his wife is a Hindu. But one assumes if one believes in reincarnation, here we have a picture of someone who has perhaps worked really hard in previous incarnations. And he's been born in a humble, in fact, even quite a difficult place, at least by American standards. Issues of poverty and drug abuse, and that was what he was born into. But because of that Jupiter, because of his past life credit, he was able to rise above it. And his Jupiter Mahadasha started in April 2008. And you could say, I mean, I haven't read his biography, Hillbilly Elegy, or Elegy, whatever it is. But really from 2008 onwards, he goes up in a straight line. It seems that nothing really can stop him, okay? I think he set up some kind of charity in Ohio, and his critics criticized it, but it didn't actually do anything. But you can see the trajectory. He graduates, goes to Yale, gets a job, becomes a lawyer, gets a job in Silicon Valley, goes to Ohio, goes back to Ohio, becomes a senator. I mean, that's a pretty amazing Jupiter Dasha. And by the end of the Jupiter Dasha, his Jupiter Dasha ended on April 2024. So it ended in April. He moves into a Saturn Dasha. Now, how is his Saturn Dasha going to work out for him? Well, we've had a couple of months of his Saturn Dasha, and he's already Donald Trump's vice presidential pick. And as I've kind of demonstrated, I think his Saturn is quite strong. And I'm thinking that things are actually starting to look pretty good for him, I would have said, from a Vedic perspective. I mean, in a way, the Vedic perspective is kind of more optimistic than the Western perspective. So is JD Vance going to be America's next vice president? I mean, certainly looking at the perspective of his Vedic chart, I would have said the answer is probably yes. But we have to remember that the vice president is not particularly important in terms of getting elected. I think I was looking at an interview with Karl Rove, and Karl Rove was saying that he was that sort of George Bush's election guru, and Karl Rove was saying that vice president doesn't matter. It's not going to help the ticket. It will only hurt the ticket. I mean, he gave the example of Sarah Palin, who hurt John McCain's ticket, but JD Vance can't help, according to him, JD Vance can't help Trump get into the White House, but he can certainly hinder him. Now, I suppose I do need to finish with the issue of what's going to happen. This was going to be the last thing I was going to look at, his Vedic chart, but I actually asked the question, and I'm just going back to Kamala Harris, and I think it's difficult to make predictions. One doesn't want to make predictions. One really doesn't want to do it. I know people are making predictions about it, but I did ask some horary charts about Kamala Harris, and I am of the view that Kamala Harris is not going to be president or vice president after February the 1st, 2025. That's my first view. And I'm also thinking, I did ask questions about whether Kamala Harris will ever be president. So I did ask that question. So let me just show you this question. Let me just show you a horary question I asked, and let me show you what let me show you what I'm looking at. I did ask a question quite recently, but I'm just looking through the past, and I did actually ask a question quite a long time ago. And here's the question I asked. Now here's the precise wording of my question was, will Kamala Harris ever be elected US president? That was my question. And I asked that question on March the 22nd, 2021. So I actually asked that question over 3 years ago. And so I would say I would take Kamala Harris as being Jupiter in this chart, because I could take her as a 10th, but I would probably take her as a 7th house because she's not the president herself. So we could take her as being Jupiter. And she's quite close to the midheaven. You can see the midheaven is the presidency. Maybe Saturn, Biden is the old man. Jupiter and Saturn sort of in the same sign. And the moon is in Cancer, quite close to America's sun. So that sort of fits. But we have the South Node on the descendant. That says something perhaps about Kamala Harris. And that may be a bit of an issue there about her reputation. But the key thing about the moon is, this chart may be really very simple. The moon is void of course. It's not going anywhere. What's the moon's next aspect? Although it's in the middle of the sign, the moon doesn't make any aspects to traditional planets. Sure, it makes an trine to Neptune, but that doesn't count. It makes an opposition to Pluto, but that doesn't count. So on the basis of this chart, I have to say that Kamala Harris will never be will never be US president. And I stand by that. She will never be US president if we take this chart. Now, there is the question, can you really ask such an absolute question? It's a very long-term thing, but she's not going to be president, certainly in any time, but I was thinking about in terms of this chart, like 2025. She's not going to be president. It's not going to happen. And I asked later horrors, will she be president or vice president by February the 1st, 2025? And notice that the South Node is again in the 7th house cast. So two charts have South Node on the 7th, hitting in the 7th house. So that kind of supports that. I mean, this is a better chart, I think, but my problem with this chart is it just didn't show, because Venus does have some dignity, the Sun and Moon are a mutual reception to each other, but it didn't really show presidency. So going back to this horary chart and looking at everything and looking at the fact that, looking at Vance's Vedic chart, I'm going to say that if Kamala Harris is the presidential candidate, and if Donald Trump is the candidate for the presidency and JD Vance is his vice presidential candidate, then I think one has to say that Trump's going to win. So what I'm saying is, here's my prediction. Trump is going to win the election provided that Kamala Harris is on the ticket. If Kamala Harris is not on the ticket, I'm not making a prediction. But if she is on the ticket, whether as a presidential candidate or a vice presidential candidate, then Trump's going to win. That's my view. Okay, that's it. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it of some interest. If you did enjoy this video, I would be grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed and you enjoyed this video, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.